started. Once again, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today for this panel discussion. This is part of our Student Success Series that CETL is doing in collaboration with Gen Ed and also with our Vice Provost Gwen. The kind of the structure of this panel is I'm gonna have each one of the panelists do a brief introduction. They're going to provide their names and where their work and what their office specifically does to support students. And then we're going to go through some questions. And I have some prepared questions, but also this is an opportunity for those of you that are in attendance to ask questions as well. So, if it gets too quiet, then I'll go ahead and just shout out a question. But if you have a question, please feel free to bring that up. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking up for whatever reason, please feel free to just put something in the chat and so that we can address the question there. And then as far as the panelists go, we can have each one of the panelists respond to this question, or just those that feel comfortable responding to the questions that we put forward. We'll kind of go from there. So with that, we're going to get started with some panelist introductions, and I don't really care what order we go in, but I want to make sure that we each panelist has an opportunity to introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Heather.
Hi, everyone. My name's Heather Ebba Maib, and I've been at the university since 2009. Up until recently, I was the director of a trio upward bound program serving potential first-generation college students, so before graduating from high school. And so we would do college and career readiness, as well as intrusive advising. Since then, I'm actually in my third week of a new position as the associate director of the Learning, Leadership, and Innovation EdD program.
Thank you, Heather. Brian. Oh, we have two Brian. Brian Dulin.
My name is Brian Dulin. I'm the coordinator for the Vandal Gateway program. Vandal Gateway is a pathway program, the pathway program here at the University of Idaho. We admit students who come in below normal admissions criteria. Usually to get into U of I, the new admissions standard is you would need a 3.0 high school GPA to get in without test scores. We're able to do direct admits for students coming in between a 2.3 and a 2.6, or for students between 2.6 and a 3.0, if they choose not to take the SAT or the ACT. And so our students, they do come in, tend to come in academically a bit underprepared. They place into English 1101, math 1108. 72% of our students are from Idaho. More than half, 55%, are first-generation college students, and about half, 48%, are on Pell. We use a cohort-based model, and I'll tell you more about that later.
Thank you, Brian. Denessy.
Hey everyone, my name's Denessy Rodriguez. I'm the coordinator for the Vandals First Office. Our office is the student support service here on campus that's designed to help first-generation students navigate through their first year of college and beyond. We really focus on academic support and creating a sense of belonging for students. And we're open to all students, even though we focus on first-generation students. Any student that feels like they could use a little extra structure and a little extra support, we're open to them.
Great, thank you. Brenda.
Hi, my name is Brenda Curry-White, and I'm the Slate Strategy Director for Strategic Enrollment Management, or SEM. Slate is our CRM, which is a constituent relations management database or customer relations management database, and we use it for recruitment and admissions. And now we use it for student success as well. So in general, SEM provides many services that support students, academic support services, which includes tutoring, academic coaching, international programs for international students, advising, honors, military veteran, registrar, career services. My role as the Slate Strategy Director is to use Slate, our CRM, strategically to support these programs as they support our students, and also to work with other people who are supporting student services outside of SEM. We've worked with Brian Dulin. We've worked with Vandal Gateway. So we're here to support the supporters, if you want to think of it that way. It's important to me to communicate well with students so they know what they need to do to be successful and provide easy ways for offices to help them be successful. And so some of the ways that we've done that is to use Slate to try to provide students with timely information and support outreach to them, especially in terms of their early grades that are reported by instructors. So we provide a portal to students that allows them to see that because they can't see it in my UI. And we send communications to them about those grades. We work with financial aid for all of their appointment scheduling. And we're working on moving many of their student communications to Slate. We work with veterans and military offices. They actually use Slate to process their VA benefit requests and to communicate with students. So there's a lot of things we do with technology, but the point is that we do our best to use technology to facilitate offices getting their work done easier so they can spend more time with students and help students know more quickly about the resources available to them. So there's a lot going on, a lot that we do, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you, Brenda. Florian.
Hello, everyone. I'm Florian Justwan. I'm the current chair of the Department of Politics and Philosophy. I've been in this role for a year and a half now. Before that, I was the chair of the Political Science Curriculum Committee, and in that context, we've launched a number of curricular initiatives that were specifically focused on sort of retention and culture for first-generation students, and I'm happy to participate in the conversation today. It's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Brian Wolf.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Brian Wolf. I've been here about 19 years now. I can't believe it when I say that. I'm a criminology professor. And in fact, it's great to be on this panel with some even former students. I won't call anybody out here, but let's see. So I'm a professor of criminology. It is I guess you could say the dean calls it a high volume program. We have a lot of students. Classes tend to be big. We also have some retention issues and all that, and we've done a few things recently to address that. I also have another role if anyone's interested. I'm actually our faculty athletics representative. There's a lot of student athletes have some very unique characteristics, and there's a lot of those that are first year. As far as criminology goes, I don't have on my dashboard, I don't see how many first generation students that we have. But over 50% of the criminology students are Pell eligible, so that kind of gives you an idea of what their background is, and a big chunk of historically marginalized population in that as well. So it's very dynamic students that I deal with as a professor, and I'm happy to be a part of this panel.
Great, thank you. So I want to start off with my first question, and then as I said, if the audience has additional questions, please feel free to chime in. But my first question is, from your vantage point, what are the most common invisible barriers for first generation and vulnerable students encounter after they've gained access to the university? And how do these barriers show up in day-to-day student interactions? So what are the most, and whomever wants to start, feel free to chime in, any of the panelists.
I'm happy to jump in. As a first generation student, and at every level of education right now, I'm also a doctoral candidate. And what's really interesting is the culture of higher education and graduate school is really difficult to navigate because there's so many norms that we just didn't know about. And we always say in Trio or Up and Down, you don't know what you don't know. And so being able to navigate those, my specific area is dealing with, trauma, sensitive practice, and adversity. And what I found is a lot of those first generation, as well as, low income students, also have fairly high rates of early life adversity. And so some of that is they don't understand that maybe their normal isn't everybody else's normal. And so that's something that folks have to really adjust to and they often go into what's called like executive dysfunction or that overwhelm, and they just kind of become stunned. And so those are some of the barriers that we don't often think about because everybody's excited to come to campus. It's the first things, but then they're immediately hit with all of these unknowns.
Heather, I have a follow-up question to you. Thank you for that response. That was great. What might that look like in a classroom? If you were a faculty member sitting teaching a first-year class, first semester, what might that look like? Like,
Sure,
how might that
sure.
appear?
So, so the first stuff, particularly like, and I also worked past tense with a lot of rural students. If they make comments about not feeling like they belong, like this isn't what they're used to, kind of withdrawing in class. Maybe they've always been a little quiet. Maybe they were a little more engaged at first. It's kind of like micro absenteeism. You see them just start to disengage a little bit, get a little quiet, start missing courses. I often call it survival mode because maybe they have a few other things going on, like financial aid isn't going through. I would say half of my undergraduate career was survival mode because I was focused on these other things. So my mind wasn't on school. So I would have a lot of like 90% complete assignments, but have this idea that it needs to be fully done before it goes in. Not wanting to ask for help, but clearly needing help. So over apologizing. So apologizing almost for their existence. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. You have so much on your plate. I don't want to bother you. Always feeling like a bother. And so those are some of like the micro symptoms that you can see, particularly with those students in overwhelm. They feel like they're imposing.
Thank you, Heather. Is there any other panelists that would like to respond to what might be some invisible barriers for students? It may even be visible barriers. Go ahead, Florian.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've noticed in our program too is so some of the first manifestations maybe are that despite the fact that students aren't doing super well, they don't want to go to office hours, right? They don't know what office hours are for. They don't know how to schedule office hours, if they even need to be scheduled. And right, going along the line of what Heather was just discussing, right? They don't want to bother. They think that office hours is just for maybe, right, the students who do really, really well or really, really poorly, but not necessarily if you have a C, right? So like there's a hidden assumption about what office hours is that's not very clear. But they also might not know, right, that they can ask for opportunities, right? So they, like in our program, right, we have a number of undergraduate research opportunities, for instance, or like financial aid opportunities. And like students might not know that this is just something that they can ask for. They can actively advocate for themselves. Again, that's sort of part of the hidden curriculum here, and making that more visible and clearer and explicitly bring this up out in the open, I think is really, really important.
Any other panelists that want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I'd like to say something too. And like Heather, I was also a first generation student. And just to reiterate what both Dr. Justwan and Heather have said, they don't know. We call that a lack of social capital. They don't have parents to tell them what to expect. They just don't know. They don't know that it's going to be different than high school. They don't know, like Dr. Justwan said, they don't know whether they can go to office hours. They don't know. They don't know that they have to read the textbooks. They're used to high school where everything was covered in class. They didn't, if they're a good student, I was a good student. I didn't have to read textbooks in high school. I found out that I did when I went to college. They just don't know that. You just have to be very clear at the get-go what you expect from them. And I think they'll rise to that occasion. Also, they might miss classes because they tend to be lower SES, as you've pointed out. And they might have to work in addition to going to school. And it's hard and it's time consuming. So they struggle in a number of ways.
Great, thank you for that. Anybody else like to, from the panel, or like to reply to that? Go ahead, Denessy.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say, our first generation students do bring a lot of knowledge and a lot of like cultural wealth. I think it just kind of takes a little bit of time for them to be able to express that and kind of takes a little bit of nudging. Like for example, what Dr. Florian said, they don't know about office hours, how to go about it. They don't want to be a bother. Through our program, we have something called grade reports where we ask students to go to each of their professors during their office hours to ask about how they're doing in their class. And we do that mostly to help students break the ice with their professors and start networking. And like Heather said, you just don't know what you don't know. Like I remember being an undergrad and asking my advisor how to get research opportunities, and she told me, you just ask, which really changed my outlook on university and advocating for yourself.
So I'm gonna kind of follow up with that with another question too. So I think a couple of folks had mentioned that a lot of times our students that might come from lower socioeconomic status have to work, right, in order to support themselves. And I know that that was definitely my case when I was in college. And I think one of the barriers were that either I was working or going to school. So if there were like volunteer opportunities that would have, been beneficial to me, like volunteering in a faculty member's lab or something like that, I really couldn't do it because there just weren't enough hours in the day. I'm wondering if you're seeing that with your students, and maybe what are some strategies that you're suggesting to them so that they do have some equitable access to these like what could be life-changing opportunities.
To chime in on this, I deal with this both with our students who work and student athletes who have a full-time job almost doing the athlete part. And so there's an overcommitment that's normalized, I think, especially among first generation students, and the eye on vocation and developing vocational skills, which are important, of course. But I think because of, to start off with what I think somebody else said about cultural capital, and there's these sort of unwritten rules in college. But once these barriers are broken down, I mean, for instance, in our program, we have students doing paid internships. They don't get paid a lot, but that's, to let them know how they can fold in, an internship or a practicum of sorts, and get college credit for doing something meaningful, right? This isn't just like, working at a, retail or something, but this is when they're doing something meaningful, and to let them know that those types of resources are available. So yeah.
Any other panelists want to respond to that or expand on that? Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah. One thing that I think about is, as educators, following some of the UDL guidelines, Universal Design for Learning guidelines, and thinking about it in terms of multiple means of engagement, specifically. So if we are offering an opportunity, how can we make adjustments for that opportunity? How can we provide alternative opportunities that can be done asynchronously? How can we make this so we can maximize involvement?
Okay, so my next question is, what practices or structures on our campus have you seen that has made the biggest impact or has really helped our students? Not just in their persistence, but also to help build confidence, to help them feel a greater sense of belonging, and to really, as Denessy said, to really help them bring all the wonderful assets that they bring to our institution, and so that they can kind of perform at their highest level and contribute as their full selves. Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, Dulin, I just spoke, but we we've done a couple things to address our persistence. Some we don't have because it's too early. We can't tell how effective they've been. But one, at least in our in the criminology major, for instance, for a long time it was an upper division heavy major where majors didn't take many classes is in their first and second year, and so we don't have a lot of bandwidth in the program, but we've slowly tinkered with making it so criminology major can now at least take one criminology class in their first and second years of each term. So that's been something at least to foster engagement. The other thing which and we just piloted this year. I totally stole this from Florian, so I want to let him know is we did pilot a first year experience. It was just a one credit, introduced them to the program. These are the resources on campus. And honestly, the reception of that was really good. And just where you deal with just little things we've talked about, like why does the Gen X criminologist who's been here 20 years have you call him Brian, but the millennial whatever English professor want to be called doctor? Just how you navigate that, or just because the professor, if somebody talks and the professor is silent, that doesn't mean disapproval, right? That's part of the learning thing. So just these cues that they learn, but also just okay, this is how we use AI and not use AI, or what are all those kinds of basic questions of navigating what we just said was the unwritten rules, and to build on what other we said to enhance that cultural capital that we get from college, whether we know we're getting it or not.
Go ahead, Florian.
So maybe to build on this a little bit. So in our case, the first year experience is a 3-credit class, and the reason we did it we made it 3 credits is we wanted to give a faculty member the opportunity to teach it in load rather than an additional credits that they have to do as service or something like this. And so in many ways, right, our first year experience does the same thing that what Brian was describing right now. The one thing that we also do is we really work very, very hard to do community building in that class. So I'm not ashamed to admit that we have a specific budget item in the department budget that is called pizza for first year experience. The class is scheduled Tuesday, Thursday during lunchtime so that there can be pizza, right? And like at the beginning, it sounds silly, right? But at the beginning of the semester, part of what we do is we play a bingo game, right? Or where like they learn something about each other, they eat pizza, and I even remove myself from the room. More significantly, though, part of what we're doing in that first year experience class is we make sure that the incoming first year students get FaceTime with the student clubs that we have in our department. And so, like going back to your original question, right? I think one of the key institutions, key bodies that exist on campus that help first generation students is other students, right? Because that creates a community, that creates a sense of belonging. And in our instance, right, we have 2 to 3 really active, really wonderful student clubs. And we just want the incoming students to spend as much time as possible with those established student clubs, which oftentimes have officers who are also first generation students. So they're great role models for incoming students, and students say, hey, I can do this. So we have a first generation student who just decided to become an officer this year because they felt so excited when the student club came into the class, took over a class session and whatever it is that they were doing. So again, like getting the incoming students, giving them as much face time as possible with the existing student societies is important. Maybe as a last note, what we do with our student clubs, we give them a little bit of an honorarium, not much, right? It's kind of, it's laughable. It's like $100 a year for the officers who run our student clubs, but just as a little thank you for the community building that they do and for like creating a welcoming culture in the department.
Great. Heather. Oh, you're
Sorry, I lost my cursor. I would say some of the high impact practices. Well, one, Florian, yes, food. Food is always something that is a high impact practice because I always say that fed brains or thinking brains, or fed bellies have thinking brains. But there's a couple of things that I think are really important, and one of them is like a high touch or a warm handoff. And this is something that I did in my first few years at the university before I was in trio, and actually still is taking someone physically to the next place, introducing them in person to that resource is one of my favorite things to do, because it also shows them the sense of community that we have amongst the faculty and staff here at the university. It's one of my favorite things to do. And so, for example, my specific upward bound program has the most students on campus this year than we've had in the 13 years I've been running the program. And one of my favorite things to do is say, oh, a friend of mine, so-and-so, is in this office. Let's walk over there together. I'm sure that I was like, let me text that person for them so that they know that someone that they have a personal relationship with also has personal relationships with other faculty and staff on campus. And so making yourself available to have these micro connections and to build micro connections across campus is really impactful. And I also wanted to say, Florian, I think it's really wonderful that you had your other or older first-gen students start working with them, because first-gen students love to give back to that group coming up behind them. They love to co-mentor or peer mentor, I would say. So that's really wonderful.
Great. Denessy?
Thank you. Reiterating a little bit about what others have said, I think sense of belonging is a huge factor in students persisting. It's one of the biggest reasons students stop out of college. So through our office, we follow what we call a cohort model. Basically, we work with the same group of students. We add new students throughout the year, but we start working with students even during the summer, making sure that they're prepared to come into college and work with them throughout the year, all the way up until they graduate. And that first year is a lot more intense, focused on academics. We do monthly check-ins. We do, like Heather said, proactive advising to make sure we're detecting problems before they become a huge issue. Making sure we connect students to other departments on campus. We also have a peer mentoring program. Being able to connect with older students is huge. So we try to kind of do a structured thing where students meet one-on-one with their peer mentors, but we also have socials every month so that they can get to know more people and more students. But yeah, I think that sense of belonging is really, really critical.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I'll just also say one other thing, because in addition to being first generation, I was also a rural student. I went to high school in West Virginia, of all places, another mountainous place with lots of rural people. And there's a thing about rural people. They're very connected to where they came from. Their family's there, their home is there. And one of the things we really push new students to do is to stand on your own and be independent. That's really hard for rural first generation students, because they want the input of their parents and their extended families. They want to go home on the weekends. And so we need to be accommodating to that to the extent that we can as well, because that's part of who they are. They love talking about where they're from too.
Great, thank you, Brenda. Do we have any questions from the audience before I ask my next prepared question?
I had a question. This is Brian.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. So I teach freshman track in my degree program, and part of college is, it was mentioned here, is kind of breaking away from the high school concept where everything is fed and to you, and you're kind of starting to get ready to be an adult in that sense. When I lay down expectations, and I come from industry, so I have a lot of like experience with expectations. The challenge is that I feel like a lot of younger students who are maybe a little less emotionally mature, they're looking to impress me, the teacher or the authority figure. And so I don't want students hearing expectations and then thinking, I've got to meet those expectations to make Brian happy. I want them to be able to know they're here for them, not for me. And that, yeah. And I think like students that are really successful, it matters, but their performance, it doesn't like really impact it too much. The ones that are less successful or that maybe have different struggles, if they start to like miss class or miss assignments, they may start to really kind of snowball because they're embarrassed even to come to class because what's their professor going to think because they're trying to impress their professor. How do you kind of give clear expectations without creating this whole idea that, oh, I can't let my teacher down, or if I do something wrong, I'm gonna, that embarrassment. Does that make sense? Kind of building that autonomy.
Would one of the panelists like to respond to that?
Thanks.
I can maybe partially respond. I think as first generation students, or at least me, it was very hard to ask for help. Not just because we want to impress our faculty, but because it's admitting that maybe we don't belong here. And so that's a huge issue. And so I think coming back from the front end, it's in how we set our expectations and how we communicate that to the students that let them know that it's okay to either ask for help or engage or even disappoint you. So I think it's front loading that before, but it's being proactive instead of being reactive, and then remembering that and I've been writing this down. I think about it all the time. Connection before consequence. So letting them know that they are humans first in your class, that you understand that humans aren't perfect and that they are emerging adults and figuring out how to work and be and learn independently. And so what you can with those expectations is say, here is what it will take to be successful in your class, and then make sure that you have the systems in place where they know that it's okay to ask for help, create that opportunity in a really safe way where they don't feel shame, and that there's maybe some kind of reward in place for seeking help. And that could be, I don't know, somebody email me something silly and then we're going to talk about something, like create those ways that maybe open the door for communication, so they know that you're not a scary person that they can just, they don't want to approach. So yeah.
Great. Brenda.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Heather. It's scary and intimidating. So I'm not so sure that students are always afraid to disappoint you, but they're intimidated by anyone with a degree after their name. They and that can just be very intimidating. And I think that's where we bring in that growth mindset and say, you didn't do as well on your quiz. That's okay. How did you study for it? Maybe try something. Is there something different you can try? Give them alternatives to the way maybe they have learned to study and to approach their coursework. Because you can always do better, right? Maybe something didn't work the first time around. You did a bad score on a quiz, but you can do better. Let's look at how you're learning. Are you reading the text? Are you going over your notes before you come to class? Are you too busy to do that? What's going on in your life? I think that just meeting them where they are will kind of take those barriers down to that student who's maybe a little intimidated.
And I'm going to kind of go on what Brenda said too, because there's strategies that you can employ in your classroom that doesn't call any specific student out, right? So I've often used a test replay where I have them go through a reflection, everybody, whether they got 100 or they got a 13%. And, they're just saying, how did they study for for this test? How might they do better? What were they most proud of? And what areas did they have for improvement? And so that way you're not calling out anybody specifically, because you don't want to increase their not feeling like they don't belong. So The other strategy that somebody had suggested, and I'll ask the panel if this is a good idea or not, but is to share your own vulnerabilities. And, it's really uncomfortable for me to talk about myself, but, in some of the professional learning things that I have participated in, they said, no, show yourself as a person, as a person that has gone through struggles. So I would often share the story of how I got a 13% on, I forget what it was, I think theory of machines test or something like that in engineering. And then I would say, like how that made me feel. And I'd be very honest, like I was ready to change my major. And then how I kind of went through to address to improve. So I didn't get another 13%, right? So your own stories of, I think, resilience, I have often tried to share freely with my students and remind them that they're never going to remember that F on a test. What they're going to remember is how they kind of navigated through that. So, Florian?
Yeah, so maybe along those lines, I wasn't quite prepared to talk about this, but now it seems like a natural fit. One of the things that I've started doing, and I think I started doing this during COVID. So I've been anxiety and depression are something that I've experienced in life, and that is, I think, like true for so many people, in academia, in our community. And I just started mentioning this, not during every class meeting, but like I make it a point, especially once fall comes and seasonal affective disorder starts to settle in the wider community, to say, look, right, this is a thing. This is a thing that I'm familiar with. I'm sure that there are people in the class who might have these types of struggles. And I've noticed that people, like, ever since I started making these comments, I saw an uptick in people who kind of shared their personal story. Some of them who then needed a little bit of help, and I could point them to appropriate resources. So, right, sharing that vulnerability, I think, is really, really important. But then the other thing I just wanted to point out here real quick is I teach research methods, right? And a lot of the classes that I teach are about how do you become a social scientist. And I do think that a lot of it is about you try something and you're not good at it at the beginning. You're gonna hand in a whole bunch of assignments that are subpar because you can only grow if you've done it wrong a few times. And so sharing that logic with students and tell them, look, at the beginning, it's completely normal to hand in subpar work. The only thing that matters is that the trajectory is right. I think that oftentimes helps to reframe what a low grade means in the larger scheme of things.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I would like to add something after Florian, and this is actually my motto for this year, because we all deal with imposter and wanting to prove ourselves, but and I think this would be a good thing to have in syllabi or at the beginning of your program: completion over perfection. I think is a really good thing to drill into minds, because you can't get better if you don't finish, and it's not going to be good. So that's my own motto for this semester is, I can't finish my dissertation if I'm holding on to it. I can't be doctor if I'm holding on to this thing because I'm afraid that it's not good enough. So completion over perfection. And I say that to my 13-year-old 8th grader: just turn it in, but it's not done. Just turn it in. Something's better than nothing.
Thank you for that. Great. So, where do you think the breakdowns most often occur between academic spaces, so our classroom, how we grade, even how we create our syllabi, and there could be other examples as well, and support spaces? So the support spaces would include things like advising, tutoring, financial aid, counseling, and what helps bridge those gaps? I think somebody commented about a warm handoff, and I think that's a great strategy, but what are some other things? Brian, go ahead.
So students tend to not voluntarily accept academic support early or at all. We have seen some growth at the university level of students accessing tutoring through Tutoring and College Success. SI peer-assisted study sessions have remained good, but I think underutilized. When we do voluntary registrations for things like college success classes, we see very, very low utilization rates. Tutoring and College Success, the academic coaches have put those on for many years, and oftentimes they can't get a classroom of 30 at the beginning of the semester. It's only at the late 8 weeks when students, after those early warning grades, after a lot of pressure and encouragement, do students finally sign up for college success classes. First year success programs, some of the really effective ones have been the ones that have instituted those. They don't encourage them, they require them. Vandals first and OMA before them have been very, OMA's been, or the prior OMA has offered first year success programs, I think, longer than anyone, them and the former college assistance migrant programs, and they would mandate it for the students to be able to accept, and they reward them with scholarships. If you come in through our program, you have to take this college success class. You have to access academic supports. Denessy and her team do tutoring right there in the center. Tribal Nation Student Affairs requires tutoring for their students and study table. With Student Support Services Trio, all of our students have to take a college success class. We also have dedicated faculty. And so oftentimes for most students without a first year success class, the first flag is raised during early warning grades, and then advisors are reaching out to them. Or college retention specialists are reaching out to them, or then at midterms, and then sometimes by that first semester, those students are on academic disqual and can't continue the fall. But the programs that have been most effective get those supports in place very early. By 4 weeks, when we reach out to students, we encourage them to start accessing tutoring or SI Pass. Or to sign up for one of the academic coaches' college success classes. I'd say that when I was the director for Student Support Services Trio, we offered students, when you come into SSS Trio, you can either take our INTR class and you will get a $1,000 scholarship at the end of it, or you could come in, you could meet with the academic advisor 5 times. You could participate in the mentoring program. You could do the FAFSA workshop, and you could take a financial literacy seminar and get a $750 scholarship. 93% of our students chose the least restrictive non-INTR college success class. So even when we incentivize it, students are opting out of those. But we've seen a lot of growth. So it's either those mandatory programs or it's college or major-led programs like Florian Justwan's first year experience for political science programs, like what Brian Wolf's doing for criminology students. Other colleges are doing them. Eric Larson over at the College of Business has been leading that Business 1190 class for many years. Jen Goodwin's joined him for facilitating sessions as well, and they have good retention rates. Students going through that. College of Natural Resources is doing that exploring natural resources experience where they take students down to Moss and they meet with faculty and learn all about the programs. And those high impact programs are sticky with students. They keep coming back and keep accessing those services. And so I'd say where it breaks down is when we are just reaching out to a student at 8 weeks, and they're in that pre-contemplation phase where they're not even accessing or thinking about accessing additional help. They're just embarrassed and wanting to avoid at that point, and that becomes a tougher battle.
Is there any other panelists that would like to respond? I'm going to follow up with that question a little bit. And what can faculty members do in their class? Go ahead.
students, if you students do care about what their faculty thinks about them, and sometimes in the bigger classes, they might think they go unnoticed. But when faculty reach out to them and they're like, "Hey, I noticed you haven't been to class in a while. Are you doing okay? Hey, we had a due date on Tuesday. You didn't get it in. What's going on?" When faculty reach out and have those conversations, it tends to be really meaningful to most students. And so I would say just sometimes if they're not in a program like Vandals First, they do need lots of contact, lots of little contacts from lots of people. In high school, uh, students didn't really learn how to manage their own time. They had teachers helping them. Their parents were going into their little portals to check on their progress. We can in college, we expect students to be able to manage their time, to check their email and respond, and it takes us all to really institute that that expectation in students to follow up with students, call them by name, come from that position of care and concern, and then to when the situation warrants it, to switch from care and concern to be a bit more, hey, the work you've done the first 8 weeks is not going to get you to be able to pass this class. You might not be academically eligible to continue. Why did you come to the University of Idaho? What do you want to get out of this experience? And what can you do differently to remain in good academic standing? Help tie in what their motivation is, why they want to be here, to what they need to do on a weekly basis to be successful as students.
Great. Is there anybody else that would like to respond? Okay, so I have a question. I'm actually going to ask each one of the panelists to kind of go through here and what is one action or perspective? What is one key takeaway that you would like the participants that have joined us today to take away from this panel session? And we will just kind of go in the same order that we did introductions and start with Heather.
Connection first. Value them as a person before what they produce. And yeah, that's huge.
Great. Brian Dulin.
Some students need lots of encouragement, and calling them by name and encouraging them, letting them know that what they produce doesn't have to be perfect. That the most important things they can do are to go to class every day and turn things in on time. And if it's not perfect, that's fine. They're students, and we'll give them feedback and help them improve and move forward. But there's hope. Always hope to move forward and to access resources and move forward.
Denessy.
I would say that student success really is a community effort from all parts of campus. I know for our program, the success of our program and our retention rates and all that stuff comes as a result of our collaborations with and partnerships with faculty, with other offices. Like Heather said, building those relationships where we can do a warm handoff and make sure students feel like they can trust us.
Thank you. Brenda.
Yeah, the one takeaway. I think, you know, we like to put people and students in boxes. We like our labels. But at the end of the day, and certainly, you know, groups of students have key characteristics in common. But all of our students are more than the sum of their parts. And they all are unique. They all have unique needs. And it's daunting, I know, to try to teach to, you know, a number of students and think of them all as unique individuals, but that's what they are. And to, again, just encourage them to be themselves, to make the mistakes they're going to make, and to give them ways to figure out how to correct those mistakes and move forward in your class. I think just supporting, you know, where they are is important.
Great, thank you. And Brian Wolf.
Yeah, so I'll say something maybe slightly controversial. I guess I have tenure. Well, I thought I did, but this is serious. For first generation and including first year students, how important, at least the ones in Moscow, these early connections and the skill developments they get from an in-person classroom, the types of to combat that isolation. I think that all kind of went over us. If I were to make a policy change, or at least I know there's a lot of advisors, I do it is strongly discourage. If not, and I know it's a thing to our enrollment goals and everything, but to keep students out of these online asynchronous, at least the asynchronous classes, at least to build those early connections and to combat that isolation that I think is especially in the first year. So that's sorry, that's a take. I guess that's a policy change I would recommend, but perhaps I know we're running out of time, but I don't want to get into that too much. But our dashboards in criminology are showing, we don't know if it's cause and effect, but the online classes is where we have some attrition problems.
I'm going to ask one real quick question, and then we'll close. And I'm going to ask everyone to fill out a form real quick about your experience with this panel. But where is there a great place to go for some of the resources? So if I'm teaching a class and I sit down and have a conversation with a student, and they're like worried about their scholarships, and they're worried about this, and they're worried about that. Is there a single source or multiple sources where I could direct them to where they could maybe get some help and support that they need? Where would you suggest that we might send students? Whomever wants to respond to that.
I'd say the Vandals First office, because that is one great single point of entry that they're going to have multiple connections. So thinking of the resource offices as a spoke in a wheel. So going to something like Vandal First, because they're going to have the connections with counseling, dean of students, CETL, even all of these places, they're going to be able to span out from there like a beautiful resource span.
Great. Thank you for that. So I wanted to thank our panelists very much. I'm going to give a little round of applause. I learned so much. And was very inspired by your words of wisdom. So thank you very much for that. We are going to share in the chat a link to a feedback form. And I just ask, if you don't mind, will you help us do a better job at providing meaningful professional learning opportunities for folks by filling out this form, and it won't take you very long. And we'll kind of hang out in case anybody has any additional questions, but I do want to thank everybody for being here today. And Sally is going to go ahead and share that link if she hasn't already done that.